candidates selected, campaign teams organised and volunteers signed up, the candidates are out on the doorstep speaking to ordinary members of the public.
We argued from the beginning that the alternatives.
And in Waveney Valley,
So the campaign is going really well. We're getting a lot of good responses on the doorstep. Lots of people prepared to vote Green, lots of interest, lots of hope. The fact that they have the chance to vote something other than Conservative is great. Our volunteers are out delivering leaflets, all the time, and what we're hearing on the doorstep as well is that people are really angry at the kind of mismanagement of their natural assets.
Conversation you might be several along.
Okay. Is that all right? Yeah, great. We're getting a fantastic response on the doorstep. There's so many people looking for a change this time round, particularly the huge numbers of people who might have voted Conservative in the past. People can see that the Green Party is the active challenger in this constituency. It's a brand new constituency, so there is going to be a new MP. There's no incumbent.
People are desperate for something to change at the moment. They're really conscious of the fact that there's a worldwide crisis of climate chaos, things that are creating refugees around the world.
There's so much disillusion in North Herefordshire among people who have traditionally voted Conservative. You knock on doors and people say, well, I've been a lifelong Conservative, but I can't vote for that pack anymore.
People in North Herefordshire had never had their door knocked before by anybody, and so for that to happen first from the Green Party and for us to have that positive message was incredible.
They're disappointed by the direction Starmer is taking the Labour Party in, and so they are considering, or many of them have already decided, to vote Green because they know that they can trust us to stick with our values. Caroline Lucas, as just one MP, has had a huge impact on British politics. Imagine what we could achieve with a few more.
while activists and candidates are largely getting a warm reception from voters, there is no time for the campaign teams to rest on their laurels.
Around March, something really terrible happened, which was really frightening for the campaign. We lost access to a lot of our data, our canvassing data. I think there was just a glitch in the canvassing software, so we didn't know whether we'd lost data or whether we just didn't have access to it until it was fixed. I think it was a couple of weeks. That was a bit nerve-wracking.
We just did not have enough people all the way through the long campaign doing that door knocking. So various low points of just action days with just 10 people at them, or when we'd been hoping for 50 really, just feeling like I was banging my head against a brick wall of just how do I get people to come. Getting that information out to the rest of the membership so that people realise that it was worth coming to North Herefordshire, that this was a long campaign worth getting involved in, was very, very difficult.
There were points earlier on, including in the winter, where I was balancing working in my day job. I was still doing a half-time job leading a charity alongside being co-leader of the party as a job share with Carla, being the candidate locally and with family responsibilities, and there were points where that was very, very challenging.
From the beginning we were getting such positive door knocking data, and it showed that we could win. And I particularly remember in October 22 Green Party conference, me sharing that information at an event and just it energising everybody in the room. Like, oh my gosh, we can win.
There were certainly weeks where it just felt like everything that could possibly go wrong was going wrong. People were tired. People were still hopeful that things could go right, but it's pretty grueling. And there were just moments where leaflets were coming through doors that weren't necessarily true from other parties, or opposition opponents were saying things about us that just weren't true.
We knew the Conservatives would play dirty, and we were always wondering what would be done. We knew that they would be using the fact that Ellie was arrested in Trafalgar Square, once standing up for people's right to protest when she was an MEP, and that they would just cast that in some horrible light.
There were some pretty awful headlines that were made up about the party. One I remember is in The Spectator saying the Green Party are terrifying.
It didn't cut through. I think that Conservative brand had become so devalued. Even just again and again and again on the doorstep, we were hearing from people saying they'd voted Conservative their whole lives, but never again.
One of the main difficulties running the Green campaign is the lack of money. While Conservatives, Labour and Reform UK have the backing of millionaires and unions, the Green Party is largely financed by ordinary members and supporters. Getting volunteers to knock doors and deliver leaflets is one thing. Paying for those leaflets and a campaign office requires hard cash.
We make tremendous use of the resources that we do have. But the fact is, we're never going to be the party that takes big corporate donations from the mainstream of capitalism. We won't take money from big oil companies, from airlines, from banks that are exploiting resources around the world, from companies that are supporting regimes around the world that are damaging human rights.
Fortunately, the appeals and crowdfunders pay off. Hundreds of members and supporters send in small amounts, and eventually there is enough to fund the 4 target campaigns. Another difficulty is getting attention in the media. While journalists might attend Green press events, the party won't get the massive airtime received by Labour and the Tories. In spring 2024, the target campaigns were well underway, and with political commentators predicting a general election in October or even later, there seemed to be plenty of time to reach every voter. Then Rishi Sunak surprised many, including his own MPs, by announcing the election would take place much sooner, on the 4th of July.
Those final 6 weeks we knew were critical, so we had to have so much ready. Even on that first night in Bristol, for example, we'd got a leaflet out to every single door in the constituency within about 3 hours of Rishi Sunak standing in Downing Street with rain pouring on him. So much so that some people had come home from work and had found out about the general election starting and being called from us.
Campaign teams quickly switched to plans drawn up for such an occasion, the shorter campaign. They contacted everyone they could find, asking for help, and, energised by the approaching election, more and more supporters turned up to lend a hand.
The length of the campaign, I think, was the hardest thing, just to motivate yourself to work so hard when you don't know when the end point is going to be. So in a way, it worked really well for us that the election was called when it was, because then we found that little bit of energy that we had. But because we'd had, the local elections, we'd had 2 really hard by-elections as well. We'd used up a lot of that energy, and I think the prospect, if it'd gone on until Christmas, it would have been hard.
Since the Greens are now standing in every constituency in England and Wales, the media have had to take the party more seriously. And they turn up in force at both the campaign launch in Bristol and the manifesto launch in Brighton. But there's a problem. A handful of the hundreds of Greens standing in the election have written tweets that are considered anti-Semitic. With the ongoing conflict in the Middle East and attacks against Jews in the UK on the increase, the press are understandably interested.
We are standing more candidates in England and Wales than the Conservatives. We're standing 574 Green candidates, a record number and an example of how we're more prepared for this election than ever before and more prepared than even the Conservatives. You'd have thought they'd have known there was going to be an election, wouldn't you? So like any other party, if issues are raised around a candidate, those are investigated. That process happens independently of the party leadership as is a matter of good governance. And those 4 candidates have been replaced by other candidates. So we're now standing right across the country.
Adrian gives an immediate answer to the question. But Deputy Leader Zach Planansky knows he can respond from his own unique experience of the party. Zach, who is Jewish himself, gives interview after interview, hoping to show that all people are welcome in the Green Party.
The Times ran a front page headline with pictures of our candidates. Now look, I'm one of 5 Jewish people who have ever been political leaders or in leadership teams in British history. So anti-Semitism is something I take, even personally, very seriously, in the same way that I do Islamophobia, and there has to be absolutely zero tolerance.
As we became more and more likely to become successful, there were more attacks on us, more things where they were seeking out where we might be vulnerable. Carla and Adrian, who had to deal with all these interviews, just did a tremendous job of speaking honestly and acknowledging where there were issues, but also just being normal human beings about it.
One of our candidates was accused of attending a Palestinian solidarity march. I think we're really in a place that as a Jewish person I feel less safe if you're starting to label that as anti-Semitism, because I would be on that same Palestinian solidarity march.
There's this horrible conflict that's affecting so many civilians, and Zach has faced attacks. Zach has stuck to his beliefs and party policy. He's made a real case for action on things, whilst trying to make sure that we're listening to other Jewish members who might have some more concerns about how we're talking about things.
In the current media climate where we have organisations who are Jewish organisations claiming to speak for the British Jewish community, who are consistently commenting on the Israeli government in a positive way, then I have felt the need to counter that by saying I don't speak for the entire Jewish community, but I do speak for myself, and I speak for many young Jewish people and older Jewish people who I've been walking and marching with and been organising at protests with, where these so-called mainstream organisations do not represent the diversity of views in the Jewish community.
In the last few days, the media is predicting a Labour landslide, with the Greens picking up only 1 additional seat.
We started getting these MRP polls that predicted it would be Labour or Conservative in Waveney Valley, and so obviously Labour and Conservatives both jumped on that and produced leaflets with those graphs on, and we did see a dip in our support on the doorstep, which was really worrying.
The MRP polls are notoriously unreliable at constituency level. They're tiny samples. They don't even do polling in certain constituencies. They try and extrapolate from tiny samples to look at what might happen around the country.
So much polling just picks up national swings and national movement because they're so used to the Labour and Conservative duopoly, and so they look at those swings between those two parties and try and project that information onto the nation overall. But Greens don't fit into that picture, so they don't know what's happening in Green target constituencies.
I definitely did feel a lot of frustration at how Labour were claiming that they could win. They were using MRP polls that, national data really, that showed them coming second, that showed us coming last. And it being so obvious that MRP poll hadn't used data from anybody actually living in North Herefordshire.
The closer you get to polling day, the few things you can do about the result, right? So when you know that you have a year to win the election, it feels doable. When you only have 2-3 days, you know that most of the work will have had to be done already. So I was getting less and less confident while also knowing that we had the data on our side.
Until the polls close, however, Green campaigners know it's still possible to make a difference. So the volunteers keep coming. Keep on delivering leaflets. Keep on knocking doors, reminding supporters to vote. In Preston Park, Brighton, the main task is speaking to undecided voters. It's a delicate matter, so the cameras aren't allowed to intrude. In Bristol, there are thousands of letters to be sent, and each of these voters will get a letter addressed by hand. In North Herefordshire, Bob and Claire are delivering last-minute leaflets in a sparsely populated area. things going are a handful of dedicated people in campaign offices, writing leaflets, organising deliveries, checking information. Another way the teams keep up morale is gathering together for a group photo. It's become a daily ritual of the campaign.
Well, in the final week or so before the result, we still had no idea if we'd won this or not. We knew that it was within reach, but it wasn't yet firmly in both hands. There were a lot of people undecided. So in that final week, we were all out knocking on doors every hour we had. And in particular, I was going to areas of the city that had the greatest number of people who were undecided and having what turned out to be really interesting and fruitful conversations with people who were hesitating because they thought that they might need to vote tactically, or perhaps they had complicated feelings about it because they'd always voted Labour in the past. Those conversations were really useful for me to understand where people were coming from, and it looks like it helped a lot of people make their minds up. But yeah, we were right up to the final day. We were not sure which way it was going to go.
Early on, you can kind of feedback and you're kind of getting a sense of what's going on. Then the last few days, it really is. You're like any other member in that moment. You just need to get on doors, get knocking on doors and get more votes. And so it was a frantic last week. It did feel really good. I kept checking in and worrying about complacency, both in myself and the rest of the membership. But in each of the constituencies that I went to, it was really clear that there was a really strong feeling that the central message that got through was that the Tories were toast, they were done, and no one needed to worry about them. But the Labour Party weren't offering real hope and real change, and that's what the Green Party were absolutely offering. We said it lots, and I think that's the message that really cut through.